Robert K. Merton, sociologist and Columbia University professor. More than a quarter century ago, he developed the concept of the self-fulfilling prophecy, the notion that the expectation of an event can actually cause it to happen.
Of all human situations, I would say that a bank run is a classic example of what is called the self-fulfilling prophecy. You take a bank which is in fact solvent, but rumors start that it can't meet its obligations. There's instant demand for fulfillment of obligations, and next thing you know, the bank has to close its door. Now, the essence of the self-fulfilling prophecy, the SFP, is that it starts with a belief that's false at the time it's held. That bank was as solvent as any other bank. But when people act on a false belief and do so collectively, they tend to produce a situation which then seems to be true. False beliefs create true reality. And that occurs not only in the case of a bank run, but occurs in every department of social life. The self-fulfilling prophecy is basic to a great deal of the troubles and the triumphs in human society.
As a phenomenon of human behavior, the self-fulfilling prophecy can be a powerful force in every aspect of our lives. We have all witnessed what happens to the postman who was afraid of dogs. The psychosomatic patient who is prescribed placebo pills.
Believe me, this will make you feel much better.
The child who's expected to turn out bad.
I've always told you you'd turn out no good. Now you've done it.
And what may be the ultimate example of the self-fulfilling prophecy? The nations who prepare for war. The idea that one person's expectation can influence the behavior of another has its roots in ancient wisdom. Pygmalion, prince of Greek and Roman mythology. His goal? To create a statue of the ideal woman. He succeeded too well. Pygmalion fell in love with his creation as if it were a real woman. Belief in himself and his love brought Venus to the rescue.
Mind his own business and leave a poor girl to mind her own business.
Woman, cease this detestable brutal.
2,000 years later, another Pygmalion, Professor Henry Higgins, believed he could create something much more difficult, a duchess out of a flower girl.
Remember that you're a human being with a soul, the divine gift of articulate speech, and that your language is the language of Milton, Shakespeare, the Bible. Don't sit there crooning like a bilious pigeon.
Oh!
Ow! Hems, what a sound. You see this creature with her curbstone English? The English that will keep her in the gutter for the rest of her days? Well, sir, in 3 months I could pass her off as a duchess at an ambassador's reception. No. Yes, I could even get her a job as a lady's maid or a shop assistant, which requires better English.
You mean you could make me?
Yes, you squashed cabbage leaf. You disgrace to the noble architecture of these columns. You incarnate insult to the English language. I could pass you off as the Queen of Sheba. R, like father. E. E, as in machine. after me. A.
E.
The rain in Spain
Rain in Spain.
stays mainly in the plains.
Stays mainly in the plains.
The rain in Spain stays.
Professor Higgins persisted in his expectation, and Eliza Doolittle was never the same again.
What do you say, Professor?
I say an ordinary Cockney girl out of the gutter. I placed her in Covent Garden.
Maestro, you are mad on the subject of Cockney dialect. The London gutter is the whole world for you. This girl is undoubtedly
A princess? Have it your own way, Maestro. Have it your own way.
Unlike the Pygmalion stories of mythology and literature, Sweeney's miracle actually happened. George Johnson, poorly educated hospital janitor from the South, when segregation was still a fact, if not a law.
Good morning, George.
Good morning, Dr. Sweeney. How you doing?
Pretty well. George, I got a little project.
Dr. James Sweeney, professor of industrial management and director of the Tulane University Biomedical Computer Center.
How would you like to be a computer operator?
Oh, Doc, you know I don't know nothing about them computers. Besides, the only black faces I ever see down there are the ones that are doing the cleaning up.
Yeah, well, maybe it's
Like the other Pygmalions, Professor Sweeney's expectation began with a belief in his own ability.
Even got past high school.
Now, don't worry about that, George. I know I can teach you everything you need to know.
Well, if you think I can do it, I'll give it a try.
Because Professor Sweeney persisted in his expectation, George Johnson was never the same again.
In order to enter a command, you type it in, and then you press the alternate coding and the 5 at the same time.
Not only did George Johnson become a computer operator, he became responsible himself for training new employees. Social psychologist Robert Rosenthal agrees that Sweeney performed a miracle, but not one without scientific explanation. Harvard professor Rosenthal has gathered experimental evidence from over 300 studies to prove that the power of expectation alone, or the Pygmalion effect, can significantly influence the behavior of others.
I guess I first became interested in a self-fulfilling prophecy as it could occur in a psychological experiment was when I was doing my doctoral dissertation at UCLA about 20 years ago. I was doing a dissertation on the defense mechanism of projection, and maybe found that what I had done was unintentionally to influence my research subjects to respond as I wanted them to respond. And this is just a hypothesis which I discussed with some of my faculty advisors at UCLA, and it was not really a shockingly new idea to them. It was something that they had noticed before, and they kind of said, yeah, we lose a certain number of doctoral dissertations all the time that way. But apparently it hadn't been systematically investigated, and that's really how I began to study the effect for the purpose of learning more specifically about it.
Today we're going to be talking
In his study of Pygmalion in the classroom, Rosenthal told each teacher in a typical elementary school that a special test had designated 20% of her students as intellectual bloomers. He assured her that these pupils, on their own, would show remarkable gains in intelligence in the next 8 months. Of course, the children had really been chosen at random. At that point, the only difference between them and their classmates was in the mind of the teacher.
Looks very nice. Looks very, very interesting.
At the end of the school term, a test revealed that the so-called bloomers had actually bloomed. gaining 4 points more in total IQ than their classmates.
Probably the most surprising result of the Pygmalion experiment had to do with teachers' perceptions of the kids. If the kids were in the experimental group, the more they gained in IQ, the more the teachers liked them, or the more favorably they rated them. If the kids were in the control group where no special gains had been expected, and especially if they were in the slow track, then the more they gained in IQ, the less favorably they were seen by the teachers, not just on intellectual variables, but also on social and emotional type variables as well. So it seems almost as though there might be some hazards to unpredicted, unexpected intellectual development. Teachers seem to prefer, and indeed maybe other people do too, that others behave as they are expected to.
From schoolroom to factory, student to worker, teacher to manager, the application of the Pygmalion effect to management has profound implications and consequences. Industrial psychologists have long realized the necessity of creating management patterns that foster motivation, increase communication and productivity. Douglas McGregor. Underlying assumptions influence managerial behavior, not only with respect to policies and procedures and techniques, but with respect to subtle aspects of everyday behavior. Francis Lickard. If a high level of performance is to be achieved, it appears to be necessary for a supervisor to have high performance goals and a contagious enthusiasm as to the importance of these goals. To such widely known management theories, the Pygmalion effect promises to bring a new dimension of empirical scientific proof. The Pygmalion effect is not strictly a one-way process from manager to employee. Certain characteristics of the worker are important in determining just what the manager's expectations will be. Young workers, or those newest to the job, may be the most susceptible to the Pygmalion effect. They are anxious to live up to the manager's goals, have less preconceptions about themselves or their job. Not only the age, but the sex, race, experience, or status of an employee can result in a self-fulfilling prophecy for the good or the bad. For instance, people once generally believed that most women and blacks were only suited to menial supportive tasks. Many of these workers adapted only too well, and finally became incapable of performing more responsible work.
In the case of discrimination, then, the self-fulfilling prophecy creates a great personal problem for each individual subject to it. If a black is hired, he doesn't know whether it's because he can do the job or because he's a black. If a black is fired, he doesn't know it's because he couldn't do the job or because he's a black. There's always the haunting presence of the question, who am I and why am I being treated the way I am?
If negative expectations can result in low performance, discrimination, and even hardcore unemployment, is it possible that positive expectations may reverse the process? At a vocational training center for the hardcore unemployed, an experimenter, Dr. Albert King, told a welding instructor that 5 of his trainees had an exceptionally high aptitude for welding. In reality, of course, the 5 men had been chosen at random. During the 6-month course, however, these high aptitude personnel, or HAPs as they grew to be called, changed their behavior significantly. They were absent fewer times than the control group. They learned the fundamentals of welding in a little more than half the time. They scored 10 points higher on a comprehensive welding test.
That's okay. Let it flatten out just a little bit more for you.
The experimenter also asked the class to rate itself. Without exception, each trainee singled out the HAPs as those he would most prefer to work and be with. When the welding instructor was later told the purpose of the experiment, he was shocked. He had truly believed he had acted the same toward all his trainees.
Not already on there. Did I have you on gas?
Yet the instructor's expectation was the only independent variable in the experiment. Knowingly or not, his beliefs had somehow influenced the HAP's performance through a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Nobody really knows why there is such a thing as the self-fulfilling prophecy, but it's possible that it's had some evolutionary significance. If we think about a caveman who may be encountering a saber-toothed tiger, well, it was a matter of life or death for him to be able to predict. And so ultimately, perhaps accurate predictions became to be prized in and of themselves. There's something funny about people. In a sense, they just don't like to be wrong. They don't like to be unable to predict outcomes. It makes them feel very insecure, and that's probably led to the development of magic and religion and science and self-fulfilling prophecy as well.
How one person's expectations actually influence another's performance may be yet more difficult to define. Something has to take place between worker and manager. A Pygmalion has to behave differently according to his expectations. But what does he do? Because the Pygmalion himself may not even be aware that he is doing anything differently, the process seems almost magical.
Self-fulfilling prophecy, it doesn't operate by magic. There are definite social, psychological processes involved. But it does not have to do with the popular view of the power of positive thinking, that you only have to believe things in order to make them come true. It's much more complex than that.
Come in. Hi, Mary.
Hi, George.
How are you?
Just fine, thanks.
How was your
The
vacation?
Pygmalion effect is not magic. From a study of over 30 experiments, Robert Rosenthal and his colleagues have evolved the four-factor theory of how expectations may be transmitted through very specific behavior. Factor number one, the climate, is composed of all the nonverbal messages from the manager, such as tone of voice, eye contact, facial expression, and body posture.
The graph and write a report, too.
Well, that'd be terrific.
Good.
This is a very important report and will be watched very carefully.
I hope I can handle it.
Mary, I know your work and you'll do your best.
Come in. Oh, hi. How was your vacation?
It's very nice.
What we have here is,
As with all four factors, the climate can communicate negative as well as positive expectations.
you'll notice that the green and blue lines are incomplete, and I would appreciate it if you do a little research and get some additional figures. So it's an assignment that will be carefully watched.
I hope I can handle it.
I know your work, and you'll do your best. Miss Spencer, what is this word here?
The second factor is feedback. Depending on what a manager expects of a subordinate, he will give her more or less response.
And I think Section 7 is a little hazy. If you would go over that again and I think rewrite it would be a good idea.
7?
Right. Miss Spencer, would you get me Jim Davis of Home Environmental Products Division?
Mary, here's your report. I thought it was very interesting reading.
Good.
Especially Section 4, where you touch on one of the problems this company's had for some years. However, I would like to go over the last section if I could. I think it could use a little bit more work to get it right on target.
Jim, this is Ragdale. Right. Would you get me...
The third way a manager can convey his positive or negative expectations is through the amount of input or information he gives to the worker.
That's all, Mary. You can go. Just do Section 7 over again.
Yes, sir, I will, but you haven't told me how you want it done, what you want.
I don't have time to discuss it right now. I'm sure if you reread it, you'll discover what's wrong.
Let me tell you about Section 7, Mary. I think if you read this report, you'll find some of the questions that I think may be occurring to you when you do Section 7 may be solved. And I've got some cross-reference material here that if you check this out, I think all your problems will be taken care of. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to call.
I won't. Thanks.
So I think we'll take about 30%
The output,
more.
or lack of it, a manager encourages from a worker is the fourth factor in how expectations can influence behavior.
Right, I told you that's all for now.
Yes, sir, but I'd like to put in a bid now for the Evans report. As soon as I finish this report, I would like you to consider me for it.
We'll have to discuss that later. I don't know if you can handle it.
Mary, after you finish this report, I'd like you to work with me on the Evans report. It's a little bit longer, and I know it means more hours, but I think it's more of a challenge to you, and I think you can do it.
Well, thank you. I'd like to try.
Washington, D.C., the Sterling Institute. Dr. J. Sterling Livingston, president and former professor at Harvard Business School, believes that every manager should learn to become a positive Pygmalion.
Well, manipulation is a dirty word, but the job of a manager is to influence his subordinates, and he does influence them either positively or negatively. And our objective is to make sure that his influences are positive and create benefits rather than negative and create disadvantages. The self-fulfilling prophecy concept, of course, is a theory. It's a theoretical concept. And we wouldn't be using it in the seminars if we hadn't done a lot of research in industry and seen it work. All of the case examples we use in our seminars are collected from actual experiences in companies where a manager's high expectations lead to high performance or low expectations lead to low performance and typically termination. John has described essentially the difference between the high performers and the low performers in his organization around the notion of their motivation. What, John, if I may pursue this for a moment, what's likely to happen to the people at the bottom of the list?
Well, they just won't stay in management, really, in the long run.
They'll either leave voluntarily,
or they'll get fired, really.
So you might let them go. Now, John, I'm going to embarrass you a bit, if you don't mind. What does this say about your expectations with respect to their performance?
I'm not sure.
It says a little bit, doesn't it, that you haven't exactly given up on these people, but you've kind of put them in the C group.
Yes, okay.
And that...
I have done a little bit of the ABC.
So it becomes a little self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, yes.
Now, I appreciate John telling us this because I think really what he's gone through is characteristic of every manager. We all tend to do that to some extent. We have a self-fulfilling prophecy. These people have the desire, they're willing to do it. We know they're going to make it, and they'll make it. And these people don't have the desire, they're probably not going to make it, they're going to leave or I'm going to fire them. Now, once you get that set of mind, obviously from a manager's point of view, it becomes self-fulfilling. In this country, we follow a practice called management by exception, in which the manager typically focuses his attention on those things that are not going well. And so every time he greets a subordinate, he tends to be negative because the subordinate isn't living up to his expectations. The net effect of that is that the negative expectations are continuously reinforced and the positive expectations are ignored. Here in Washington, there is a football team called the Redskins. And the place kicker on the Redskins, under Lombardi, had the best record in all the league. He was fantastic. His name was Curt Knight. Now, when George Allen came along, whom everyone would regard by and large as a top-flight coach, George Allen, for some reason, had low expectation of this man's ability to kick a field goal, even though he had the best record in the whole league. And so in the playoffs, when I believe they were playing Dallas, instead of calling a kick on the last play, where if the kick had been successful, they would have won the game, Allen called a run. And after he called the run, the newspaper reporters got on him and said, "Why didn't you call a kick?" And he said, "Because I didn't think Curt Knight would make it." From that time on, Curt Knight's performance has gone straight down to a point where he says, I feel like it's a federal offense every time I get out there and miss. And I get out there and I'm so concerned about missing, that's all I do but miss. I think there's no doubt that a manager's expectations influence the results he gets from his subordinates. If his expectations are high, he gets good results. If his expectations are low, he gets poor results. That comes through in the seminar, and I think it's very important that the people recognize how they influence their subordinates, that they really are Pygmalion, that they can enhance the careers of their subordinates or they can depress the careers of their subordinates. It's an important lesson for them to learn, because until they've learned that, they're not likely to be more effective in working with their people.
The point of a manager's expectations is that whether he tries to make it work or not, it almost inevitably influences the results because of the way he treats his people once his expectations are set. His expectations influence the way he treats them. The way he treats them influences the results.
That was the beginning of self-respect for me. You see, the difference between a lady and a flower girl isn't how she behaves. It's how she's treated.